Finally, Harry.
And we're live. Welcome everyone to the live stream, and welcome everyone to the rap. All right, good job on the game. We got some announcements for you, and Katie's going to give them. So let's welcome her up to the front as she comes up and gives the announcements.
Oh, one person's watching.
Hi guys, how's it going? Hi Kristen. Hi everyone at home. They're kind of quiet. All right. I got some announcements for you today. Good job on the game, you guys. Those were hard. You guys did good. All right, our first announcement, our lovely gators are for sale. Here, Evan, come on up here and be my show and tell guy. Okay, look at it. See, it's cool. It's got our logo here, Oak Point student. And you can have it as a hat. Yeah, see? Keep you warm this winter. All right, thanks. So $5 at the cafe. Grab yours today. We're not going to order anymore, so once they're gone, they're gone. All right. Once they're gone. They're just gone. Yeah, they're out of here. They're never to be seen again. All right, announcement number 2 is coming up this month. I can't believe it's October, you guys.
Wow.
Literally October 1st today. I'm like, woo. All right, so this month is our life group night. How many of you guys have talked about life group night in your life groups? Got a plan? Who's got a plan? Got a semi-plan going? Okay, well tonight, if you haven't talked about it yet, it's a good night to talk about what you want to do for life group night. I've heard some rumors about what's going to be going on in your life group night, so I might have to crash. They sound super fun. So that's coming up on the 15th. So it's just like 3 or so weeks away. So that's coming up. It's going to be a blast. So you're not going to want to miss it for anything. If you have like a silly sport or something that you want to totally skip it, so you can like have fun with your life group. So be there, be square. That's all for me today. 2 short little announcements. Yeah, that's it. 1, 2. All right. We'll see you guys later. I'm giving it up to Perry.
I feel like we need everyone needs to just like snap at the end of that, guys. Woo! Welcome. We're going to do worship at the end after the message right now. So we're going to head right into it. And who's got their booklet on you? Loudy, can I borrow your booklet? I just want to one more time, and then I'll stop pestering you all about the booklets. Because we're going through this series, and the goal is that you guys are in the Word going through the series with us every day. That is the goal. Every day meaning 5 days a week. Business days. So that's what we want to see out of this, and I did just want one more time to reiterate that when you open up your booklet here, you can still get one. It's only $5, and you can still grab one, and then you can be a part of what we're doing with this parable series. What you're going to see is a page saying how to study the parables. That's going to help you walk through it. It's going to help guide you in how you read the parables. You're going to go to reading plan. Listen up. You're going to go to reading plan option 2. You have 2 different reading plans. You are not going to pick the reading plan option 1, which is a sermon series on Sunday morning. We're going to do option 2, which says men or women groups reading plan. We're actually going through those specific parables. All right, so don't be confused about that. Make sure you're going through the right ones. And then every single week is going to have 5 days of basically 1 page per day, and you'll be able to go through that. And at the end of each week, there's going to be a sermon notes page where you can write notes down from the sermon that we did in this parable. All right. So right now, if you're following along and if you're on track with us, then you should be in week 2. You should be like in the middle of week 2 with only 1 day left from week 2. And so if you've been going through it, then you'll know exactly which parable we're about to get to. But in case you haven't, I'm going to leave you hanging as a punishment for not going through week 2 with us, all right? I'll reveal it, I promise. I'll reveal it at some point. But remember that the parables are all very different from one another. They're all very different from one another. Who remembers what the first parable was last week? The seed thing is not what most people call it, but I think you're on the right track. What is it called? Yeah. Yeah. Parable of the growing seed, nailed it. Also known as the seed thing. That's also how it's known in the biz. We looked at the parable of the growing seed, and with this, Jesus painting a picture of the kingdom for us to see. Right? That's what he gave it. And he didn't give us a story, right? Remember, he only gave us an image. He only gave us a picture. And that's why we kind of gave you that little time-lapse video, right, of the seed, of the wheat field growing up and starting out as like tiny little plants and then growing up into a big giant stalk that was ready for the reaping so that you could take those plants and turn them into food. That was what happens. And Jesus gave us this picture of the kingdom as an ever-expanding thing until God decides to fulfill everything and bring justice and righteousness 100% down into this world and establish his kingdom on earth that would never end. And we see this in Revelation, but the parable is actually a hint towards that, which is really cool. Today is different because today we're given a story. This time we're given characters. Right, we have a plot. I know, amazing. We have a plot. We have a beginning. We have a conflict. We have a conflict resolution. Like we have everything. Every element of a story is in the parable today. We have a protagonist. We have an antagonist. Who remembers what a protagonist is? Who's ever taken an English course before? Who knows what a protagonist is? Yes, it's the main character, right? The main character, not necessarily the good guy. A protagonist does not have to be a good guy. It just has to be the main character. Sometimes the main characters are bad. That happens in some stories. But the antagonist is the character going against the protagonist. The antagonist is the character producing the conflict that the protagonist is dealing with. That's what the antagonist is. Right? So, and today we have that, guys. We have a story, a real life story, which is amazing. And so it's different than what we got last time. Now, following along the story, you're going to be opened up to a revelation from God that we might not have accepted before. And this is what a story does. Remember, I just read in my commentary that as we were going through this one, the writer said that Jesus' parables tend to either shock or deceive you into truth. And I just love that little phrase because it was just so clever. Because remember that if you picture your mind like a city, we all have city walls in front of that mind, right? I keep using this imagery. I'm going to keep using it to kind of give you a glimpse of how powerful a parable is. If we all have this like city wall in front where we can only allow certain things in that we deem worthy of our time. So for instance, you will open up the gate for your video games of the city wall. Like you let all of that come in. When you're hanging out with your friends, all the things that your friends tell you, you open up that gate nice and wide. And then when you go to school, you like put it open like a crack, just like a little bit. So just enough kind of gets in there, right? That's our city wall, right? And we have a gate that we allow things inside the mind and we close things in the mind. And Jesus knows this. And he knows that the two main powers of the wall, at least especially with middle schoolers, no offense, is boredom, right? Boredom is a powerful thing, guys. If you have enough boredom built up, you can ignore anything. It's incredible. The power of boredom is just an incredible thing. And that boredom can oftentimes like close up that wall so that you're not hearing something or listening to something that you might need to hear, right? Boredom is a powerful thing. The other thing is defensiveness. Sometimes we have a defensiveness, a natural tendency to say, I don't like you, or I don't like what you stand for, or I don't like what I think you're getting at, and so I'm not going to listen, and I'm not going to hear, and I'm just gonna not hear it, or I'm gonna color what you're saying with my own views on things. I don't want to hear it, right? That defensiveness is also really embedded in our nature. And Jesus knows this, and he's talking to people that are often very easily defensive. And so Jesus uses story to get around the gate, and then just like you would maybe sneak into city walls at night, that you find like a trap door or a tiny little entrance that no one watches or cares about. In that way, the story gets into the city walls, and suddenly you have the truth, the revelation that Jesus is trying to give you in your midst, and you didn't even open up the gate. That's the power of a story. As a story is going to do that. It's amazing. He shocks or even deceives you into truth. Now, he's not lying to you. He's giving you revelation and truth in a way that you might have not have accepted it before. Before I start jumping right into it, I think it's important for us to look around the context of when it's written in. And for those of you who are doing your parable booklet study, you'll know that that is the first letter of the comma method, right? The comma method, which starts with context, then it moves to observation. But the context is the first one, which means what? You look around the story and you pick up some clues of what's going on around the story. That's what context is. And sometimes context is more important than others. This time is a really important one. Because in Matthew, in chapter 18, which is where we're going to be tonight, we're going to be in chapter 18, Jesus gives like this long discourse, and there's two main themes in this whole discourse. It's judgment. Remember the J word from last week? The J word that you're only supposed to say a few times? Judgment, judgment, judgment. Yep, judgment is one of them. And then the other is mercy. It's this discourse that combines these two things. Two things that we don't think work together very well. Two things that we feel like might be opposites, right? Polar opposites. Judgment is one thing. Mercy is a completely different thing. And yet this entire chapter is all about judgment with mercy. We're going to see that. We're not going to open up the whole chapter, but I'm going to give you a little rundown. In chapter 18, verses 1 through 5, Jesus overhears his disciples debating with themselves over who is the greatest. They were arguing with themselves over who's the best. Now, how many of you guys have that argument with your friends like on a regular basis? Yeah, you just walk up to your friend and like, hey, I'm the greatest. I didn't know if you knew that, but I am the greatest. And then your other friend walks up to your little circle and is like, I heard that someone else thought that you were the greatest, but I am actually the greatest. And then your other friend comes up and says, oh yeah, well, I'm the greatest. I know it's a normal argument that like friend groups have. Well, that's what the disciples were having an argument over. They're saying, they're trying to say who's the greatest. And Jesus stops them. And he says, guys, if you want to be the greatest in the kingdom, you need to be like this child. And he holds up a child. And at that point, everyone would have been really confused. Because in that culture, guys, children were not really worth much, except that eventually they would not be children. A child was only worth what they would become as an adult, right? You don't want a child to stay a child, right? Like a child isn't really worth anything. But when that child grows up to become an adult, they're worth something to you as a family, right? They can work the farm, they can tend to the house, right? They can do things that adults do, right? So children are seen as not really worth that much back in the day. Like back in Jesus' time, a child is only worth as much as they would grow up to be. And so when Jesus holds up a child and says, you need to be like this, they're like, a child? What are you talking about? It says, if you want to be the greatest in the kingdom, you need to take on the spirit and the humility of a child. It's incredible. He's getting at mercy here. And at first you might not see the mercy in it. But when he keeps going, you're going to see that there's this constant switching back and forth from mercy to judgment. Because in verse 6, he switches to judgment. And he kind of continues kind of holding up this child as really important to him, really important to the Lord. And he says, if anyone causes this child to stumble, there's going to be serious, grave consequences for that person. Intense judgment. And he actually says something really intense, guys. And this is the Bible, guys. The Bible is not G-rated. And so it just is what it is. And you might often think of Jesus as like hipster Jesus with sandals and flowing hair, holding a lamb in one hand and holding a baby in the other hand, and sprinkling CBD oil on everyone he walks by. Like, you might think of Jesus in that way, but Jesus is also the one who says this in Matthew 6. He says, if anyone causes this child to stumble, it would be better if you take them out to sea, tie a millstone around their head, and throw them in the ocean. Yeah, not hipster Jesus. Yeah, hipster Jesus was not actually real. Jesus is not a hipster. Jesus, he was saying, this child is worth so much that there will be judgment on those who cause a child to stumble. But then when you're kind of left hanging with this big judgment Jesus about, oh man, if you cause this child to stumble, there's going to be serious consequences. Then he all of a sudden switches to mercy. Because in verse 10, he gives the parable of the shepherd leaving his flock for the one lost sheep that left his flock. He's a shepherd over 100 sheep. One sheep strays away out of the flock, and he leaves the 99 sheep to go find the one. This is talking about a merciful, shepherding God who will actually pursue you with his mercy. It's incredible. It's a very merciful story, and it's actually the story where we get reckless love from. If you guys were wondering on that, like, oh yeah, that's where it comes from. Leave the 99, go get the one. It comes from this moment in Matthew. But then he stops there, and he starts talking about a wholly different issue, which is dealing with conflict in the church. Dealing with conflict and issues in the church. What happens when one person sins against another person, or one person does something to offend another person in the church, like blatantly, sinfully offending the other person? What do you do? How do you deal with that in the church? And this is how Jesus said to do it. You begin with grace and mercy. You bring truth and loving grace into that person's life. You bring other people within the church to bring discernment and wisdom into the issue. And he says you plead with that person who committed the sin to repent of what they did to the other person in the church. But here's where Jesus went a little, well, what I think a lot of people would say, wait a sec, that's not hipster Jesus. He says, if that person does not repent, then you should treat that person like a tax collector or a pagan. And you're like, what's wrong with being a tax collector? In that time, it was a big deal. If you're a tax collector, you were a traitor to your class. You were a traitor to your people, to your community. Tax collectors did not go into the synagogue. They were cast out of their society. So what Jesus is saying is that if this person does not repent from their sin, then you should basically excommunicate them. You should kick them out of the church. That's what Jesus says right there. Mercy, judgment. See, this is going back and forth over and over and over again. And the people around him are hearing these two things, and Peter kind of gets a little confused. I think Peter stands and he's like, okay, Jesus, talking about a lot of mercy, talking about a lot of judgment. Okay, I want to ask a question about forgiveness. Okay, so let's say that I'm in that exact same place. Okay, because he just heard Jesus talking about dealing with conflict in the church, and there is a rule in Judaism about forgiveness, and Peter's going to bring that up. He's like, okay, let's say someone offends me. How many times should I forgive them? Let's read the very beginning of what Peter asks. In 18:21, Peter says this. It says, then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother and sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? And you're like, 7 times? That feels like an odd number to just stop at. Well, let me give you some context on this. Back in the day, in their time, there was a tradition in their culture, in this Jewish culture. Now, this is not in the Bible, but this is just what their tradition kind of created, that you must forgive someone 3 times. And if you've forgiven them 3 times, the 4th one, you have the right to carry a grudge. You have the right to get back at that person. That's when the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth comes into play at that point. That was the tradition of their culture. You get 3 strikes and then you're out. So imagine doing that, guys. Imagine if you hang out with your friends every day, but on your phone you have a tally of how many times your friend offends you. And if you hit 3, better watch out for number 4. Right? That's what this time was like, guys. Like, you have 3 strikes, you have 3 offenses, and then the 4th one you do not have to forgive. So in that day and time, if you forgave someone 4 times, you're considered a really merciful, forgiving person. If you hit 4, you would let people know, hey everybody, I'm on number 5. I just want everyone to be aware. I've forgiven this person 5 times. And we'll be like, wow, that guy is really cool. Really, really cool that he's forgiven them many times. So Jesus is talking about dealing with conflict, dealing with someone offending you or sinning against you. And Peter raises the question, okay, Jesus, you're saying we should be merciful. You're saying that we should be graceful, and that kicking someone out of the church is like the last step. Okay, is that what you're saying? Jesus is like, yeah. So he's like, okay. So Peter's like, okay. So how many times should we actually forgive someone? Up to 7 times? And I think Peter was expecting Jesus to be impressed. Because 7 was a lot in their culture. Guys, like 7 was a big deal. If you hit 7, like you were the most forgiving person ever. And Peter's like, all right, Jesus, I think I have an idea of how merciful we should be. 7 forgiveness tallies. What do you think? I can do that. I think I can hold mine. And I think he like stopped and like waited for Jesus to be like, wow, Peter, I was going to say 6, but you went up to 7. That's amazing, Peter. You are a merciful person. Good job, everybody. Can we give a nice round of applause to Peter? Right? I think that's what he's expecting from Jesus. And then Jesus stops and he says this in 18:22. He says, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. What? Jesus just times it by 11? 11. I don't math good, guys. He timed it by 11. Just like that. And Peter's like, wait a second. 77 times? Who has the time to keep track of that? Like, are you saying I have to carry like a clay tablet on me at all times and just like keep a tally of how many times? And if I hit 78, then it's okay if I hold a grudge? Is that what you're saying? Everyone, that would have been a really shocking statement to say in this time. And I can imagine that after Jesus had said 77 times, everyone would have stopped talking and everyone's jaws would have dropped. Like, 77 times? What? That's nuts. I can imagine Jesus was letting the suspension build. And as everyone's eyes were on him, he begins to tell a story. And this is our parable. This is our parable for today. Let's listen up. He says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had should be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. So stop right there. So as we get to this point in the story, we have a protagonist. We have a main character in the story. Who is the main character in the story? Now, oftentimes in a story, it would be the first character that shows up, right? And who's the first character that shows up in the story? You get the king, right? It says that the kingdom of heaven is like a king. But here's the deal. If Jesus was answering Peter's question, that means that Peter has a place in the story, that Peter's character it must be a protagonist in the story. So when Peter's character, if there's a character representing Peter or a character representing the people he's talking to, do you think it would be the king? No, it wouldn't be the king. Peter is not a kingly person. Just gonna spoiler alert on the Bible. Peter does not act like a king very often. So it's not the king. Who's the other character that must be the protagonist? Who's the main character then? Be the servant. And that makes sense. Because as you are introduced to this servant, like you naturally are going to start to feel sympathy towards this servant. And you don't even realize how intense you should feel sympathy for the servant, because this servant owed 10,000 talents. Now, I know like you might be sitting there being like, I only have a few talents. I can juggle, I can do a Rubik's Cube. Like, I don't know how many talents you think you have. But that's not actually what this is saying. It's not saying talents is like abilities to do things. A talent was a unit of money back then. And I'm just going to take you back in time to give you an idea of how much money this actually is, 10,000 talents. All right, so if you were a normal day worker back in the day, back in Jesus' day, you'd work all day and you'd get a denarius. That's 1 denarius. And that denarius would be able to give you some bread, probably be able to give you some other things that you could take back to your family and support your family, right? 1 denarius is what a normal person gets in a day's work back in the day. In order to get to a talent, you needed 6,000 denarii. 6,000, which means that if you were a normal worker, you would have to work 6,000 days to get to a single talent. So how long do you think it would take just one normal worker to hit 10,000 talents? How many years? I have the answer in front of me because I did the math. And I checked it like 24 times because I wanted to make sure that I got this right. Oh, we got it, Grace. You got a guess? That was kind of rhetorical, but if you got the answer, what do you think? How many years does it take? What's that? You could definitely say this is a lifetime. Yeah, 164,000 years. So yes, to answer your question, that is a lifetime, plus a few of years of paying off this debt. That is a really long time, which means what, guys? This debt is crushing. This is a ridiculous amount of debt. And I even think at that point, it's still hard to grasp what kind of money is being talked about here. So I went even further, and I did fractions. And for those of you who are in fractions right now and dealing with fractions, this is actually when it works, like when you can actually do things with fractions. Like this is an example. All you have to do is find the common denominator. Listen up. You find a common denominator, and you find one thing that works with this, and then you make the denominator the same so you can find what is the top one, the numerator? Yes, the numerator is like what you're going for. That's the variable. So I did the work on that, and I found it out. And I just kind of applied it to today's work. A normal construction worker in Michigan makes about $30K a year before taxes. Now, number one, anyone who knows how much money that is should know that that's not a lot to live on. But a $30K a year is what a normal construction worker makes in Michigan. Okay, so if you just took that and that's 1 year, and you multiplied it times the amount of time it would take someone in this day to pay off 10,000 pounds of debt, that puts you at a certain price tag. You ready for this? Okay, $4,920 billion.
Oh, that's easy. That's
Yeah.
How does this start to generate that much money? Yeah. That is.
That's a good question. I don't know.
That much money.
Shh. Everyone chill. I just want you to sit on that for a sec. $5 trillion. That's basically $5 trillion if you round up. I guess you're rounding up 80 billion, but still, like if you're rounding up, that's $5 trillion. Guys, that's like national debt level. Like it took America a long time to get to that point, and we're still going. But like this is one person. This is a single person. USA. So guys, that is, listen up. This is one person. A single person owes this kind of cash. That is a crushing debt. Guys, Jeff Bezos is currently the richest man in the world. He's worth about 200 billion. So you would need another like 25 Jeff Bezoses to get this kind of sum paid off. That's insane. Like, I want you to hear that because I want you to understand that when Jesus said 10,000 talents, everyone in his audience was like, this is silly. No one owes anyone 10,000 talents. That's like a ridiculous sum of money. No one owes anyone that kind of cash. No one could even afford to loan that kind of cash. It would be like a child saying the most money they could possibly imagine being like a billion, zillion, jillion, right? Like it's just a ridiculous sum. It's meant to be a hyperbole. A hyperbole is an exaggeration for effect. And that's what Jesus said here. Guys, this amount of cash is so much that it's unfathomable. Listen up, eyes up here. This is a crushing debt, which means that a man under this kind of debt should gain our sympathy. We're naturally following this main character. We're following this protagonist who has this kind of debt, and he is just crushed under the weight of it. And the king brings him into court and says, you need to pay me back this debt. And if you don't, I'm going to enslave your family, I'm going to enslave you, and everyone is going to be enslaved for the rest of your life until it's paid back, which is never, 164,000 years. That's how long that would take. And the servant is just crushed, and he's begging the king, please, don't sell my family into slavery. Please give me some time so I can pay this off, or at least try to make a dent in paying this off. And this is what a story does. A story should get you going, should get you empathizing and sympathizing with this character. This stinks. No one likes No one likes to see a little guy get crushed under the weight of a king's thumb. Like, no one likes that. We're rooting for this guy. And what does the king do? Takes pity on him. Doesn't throw him and his whole family into debtor's prison. He takes pity on him and he forgives him the entire debt. He's free. Amazing. And this is a great place for the story to end, guys. That God gives forgiveness. That's awesome. But the story actually keeps going. So we're going to keep it going because Jesus didn't actually end here. It says, but then that servant went out. He found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. He grabbed him, began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I'll pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay back the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged, and they went and told their master everything that had happened. Does our perspective on the servant change a little bit? He's a jerk. Yes, he's a jerk. You no longer feel bad for him. Now you want him to get his due, right? You want some justice done on this jerk of a servant. Well, the king is going to come down. Let's see what the king does. The master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said. I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he could pay back all that he owed. Tough times for the servant, guys. Tough times for the servant. Listen up. Hey, guys. Boys, I know you want to say things all the time in the middle of the sermon, but let's only do that when I ask a question that I'm asking you to say something. How about that? Cool? Awesome. It distracts me. I just don't want it to distract anyone else. So everything's reversed. We see this in the story. The servant finds someone who owes him 100 denarii. And if we did the same math that got us to 5 trillion, that would be about 10 grand. Which obviously 10 grand is not a small amount, okay? That's a lot. So if you have a friend that owes you 10 grand, you're probably going to want him to pay that back. But it's no 5 trillion. I think we can all agree with that. It's no 5 trillion. And he doesn't take any mercy on him. He throws him into prison until he can pay off that debt. And this guy loses all sympathy from us. He turns out to be this giant jerk. And at the end, you should be happy about him getting his justice from the king. When the king found out about this and threw him in prison, the debt was reestablished on him. And what the story is kind of building you up to is for you to get to the point where you're like, yeah, he got what he deserved. That jerk. Yep. King gave him what he needed to get. That is exactly what needed to happen. And that's exactly where Jesus wants you. Jesus wants you to be at that point where you're like, that guy deserves punishment. That guy deserves for the king to throw the book at him. And Jesus is like, yes, exactly. And he continues in verse 35. And he says this is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. And suddenly, the place goes quiet. The story is over. And we realize that we have a place in this story. That Peter is the servant. That we are the servant. And from the context of Matthew being on judgment and mercy, those two things working together, we see one point, one of our 2 points for tonight, which is that with great grace comes great responsibility. Who knows what that's from? That's actually from a movie. Who knows what that's from? Yeah, Jesse. Spider-Man. I knew you would get it. I knew someone would get it. Uncle Ben tells Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. And then Uncle Ben dies. Sorry, spoiler alert on Spider-Man. I love that line, guys. I've always loved that line. And so I just kind of reformed it for this because I think it makes sense. Eyes up here. I think it makes sense. With great grace comes great responsibility. Why does Jesus talk so much about judgment? You're like, I thought Jesus was the good guy. I thought Jesus was the guy with the nice shaggy beard and just that laugh that kind of gets everyone else laughing in the room, and he's hugging babies and and kissing babies and I don't know, babies and puppies. Those images happen when we often think of Jesus, and yet Jesus talks a lot about judgment. Because while judgment can exist without mercy, Judgment doesn't need mercy to exist. Judgment is just giving someone what they deserve. That is judgment, giving someone what they deserve. You don't need mercy for that to work. And that's kind of how our world works. Like, our world doesn't need mercy. If mercy happens in our world, it's like, oh, that was nice. It's like a special occasion. We live in a world that skews justice off the mark. That's wherever you are. Every nation in this world, every kingdom, empire that has ever lived in this world, that ever will live in this world, does not have a perfect justice system. It's impossible. It's never happened, never will happen until Jesus comes back. That's just the truth. We live in a world that is not just. We live in a world that doesn't show mercy as a part of judgment. We live in a world that just judges based on interpretation, based on how we interpret that person or that people or anything. Innocent people are often punished. Guilty people are often let off the hook. And judgment exists without mercy in our worlds. But here's the deal. No matter what, mercy can't exist without judgment. Judgment can exist without mercy, but mercy cannot exist without judgment. Mercy needs judgment to exist. Let me give you an example. Let's say that my son, Topher, decided one day he would open up the cupboard in our kitchen and he grabs a big handful of M&Ms that's in our cupboard. Grabs that handful, he just shoves it in his mouth, and he's just like munching on chocolate M&Ms, and he's just loving it. Let's say I walk by Topher, I see what he's doing. I'm like, Topher. He like looks at me, he's got like a mouthful of M&Ms, like he didn't ask or anything. And I'm like, Topher, hey, that's not actually against the rules. You're cool. That's cool. You can do whatever you want. You can have candy. You can do whatever you want. Keep doing what you're doing, man. And he's like, okay. Was that mercy? No, because there was no rule. There was no possibility of judgment. There was no rule, therefore that wasn't actually mercy. But let's say that I sit him down and I'm like, Topher, this has actually happened. I'm recalling a real conversation I had with him. I'm like, Topher, you knew you weren't supposed to take that candy. That was a rule, and you lied to us. You deceived us. You lied, and you did something you weren't supposed to. You deserve consequences. And Topher's like, yeah, I deserve consequences. I'm like, but I'm not going to give you any. I just want to talk. But you need to know that that wasn't okay. That you can't lie to me like that. You can't just take things without asking. Was that mercy? Yes. You see the difference between the two? The first one didn't have judgment, therefore it was not mercy. The second one had judgment as a possibility, as a real thing. In pending judgment, you get what you deserve, and instead of giving Topher what he deserved, I gave him mercy. I gave him grace. Mercy needs judgment to exist. But Jesus says that the kingdom is like a man who owes an unpayable debt. Right? And rather than judging him and giving him what he deserves, I'm sorry, if you've racked up a $5 trillion debt, you deserve to go to prison. That's pretty ridiculous. And instead of giving him what he deserves and throwing him in prison, the king shows mercy. And he bears the cost of the debt. Because guess what? When you just forgive a debt, that doesn't mean that the money just disappears into thin air and just shows up in front of your front doorstep. That's not how it works. If you forgive someone's debt, you have to bear the cost of that debt. And so the king bore the cost of this ridiculous sum of money and forgave him. Rather than simply judgment and condemnation, there is mercy. You see a difference between the world that we live in and the world that Jesus is describing. You see mercy over judgment. And this is actually what Jesus came to do. He came to flip-flop how our world works. Our world has a skewed way of doing justice, has a skewed way of doing judgment, and mercy is not really in the picture in our worlds. But in Jesus' world, in the kingdom, because remember, this is about the kingdom, he says, this is what my world is like. This is what my kingdom is like. It's a place where mercy is right along with judgment. Justice happens and mercy reigns. We see this in Luke 4:18. Jesus says exactly what he came to do. He goes in front of his own hometown. He opens up a scroll And he reads this off as a declaration of who he is and what he's doing. He says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Jesus came to bring mercy. The gospel is a gospel of mercy. But the level of mercy has to match the level of judgment we deserved. If you have a $5 trillion debt, that's $5 trillion mercy. That's a lot more mercy than $10,000 debt. See what I'm saying? The amount of mercy has to match the amount of judgment you deserve. And in the parable, Jesus is saying that we are the recipient of an unrepayable grace. It's impossible to pay this back. We are the servant. We are the ones under this crushing debt. We live under the weight of that debt. It's crushing. You can't possibly live under that. You can't possibly pay it back. There's no way you can possibly get under this debt. But then all of a sudden that debt has been lifted, and now you're under a different weight. We like to think that we're free. That, oh, you don't have that off your chest anymore. That feels nice. I don't owe $5 trillion. When Jesus is saying, no, now you have a different weight. You have a weight of grace. You now have an incredible weight of grace. That grace equals the weight of your debt. Now you live under that weight of grace. And guys, that grace wasn't cheap. It wasn't cheap mercy. It wasn't cheap grace. You don't just bounce around and saying, well, glad that was over with. Don't have that debt anymore. Woo, that was nice. No, you live under the weight of it. You're bound to that grace for the rest of your life. In the same way that you were bound to the debt for the rest of your life, you're bound to the grace for the rest of your life. It's a weight. It's something that is now a part of you that you bear forever. And we're responsible to extend grace and mercy to everyone around us. Because no one's debt to you ever comes close to the debt you owed the king. No one's debt to you is ever going to come close to the debt that you owed God, the king. With great grace comes great responsibility. Not just let off the hook. You're brought into the kingdom, a citizen of the kingdom, and you bear the weight of that grace forever. You aren't first and foremost a citizen of the world. You're a citizen of the kingdom. And in God's kingdom, mercy reigns. That's what it says in James. Mercy triumphs over judgment. You're responsible for extending grace in this way. Because God's grace is transformative, not cheap. When we treat God's grace as like God's forgiveness is like, man, it feels nice to receive God's forgiveness. That's really nice. I can now walk around not worrying about things. And if I sin, that's really nice. I know that God's going to forgive me. So it's not really a big deal. That's cheap grace. That's not transformative grace. When the justice system in our world fails, which it does all the time, sometimes it gets it right, sometimes it gets it wrong. But when it fails and a guilty person deserving of punishment gets off the hook on a technicality or a missing of some evidence, that person usually just kind of shrugs it off. Whenever that person gets off, they're like, yeah, that was nice. Got through that, am I right? Feels good, right? That's kind of what often happens when someone gets off on like just a technicality or something. I remember, like, you guys, this is not going to really mean anything to you guys, but this is this is what kind of ticked people off about OJ back in the day. There was this kind of like aura about him that was like he got off, like he was a guy who was tried and not convicted for a crime that he most likely committed. And when he got off, people were pretty mad. People did not like that he got off that. But when he did, he was like, "Ooh, that feels good." Like that was his reaction. He just kind of shrugged it off. That's cheap grace. That's grace that just worked out for you. God's grace is transformative. It literally transforms you into a graceful and merciful person because you bear the weight of that grace every day. And no one's debt to you comes close to matching the debt you owe the king. I want to give you an example of this in real life that shocked the nation and is still shocking to this day. In 2015, a boy, I was about to say a man, it was a boy named Dylan Roof walked into a church in Charleston, South Carolina, and he shot and killed 9 people gathering for a prayer service at a church. It was one of the most horrific things that has happened in our nation in a long time. It was terrifying, it was tragic, and he was a sick, horrible person. And he was trying to start a race war. That was his goal, that he wanted to create such a tragedy and such an awful act that it would get black people to pick up arms and start a war. That was what his goal was. Everyone he killed was black. And as terrifying, as tragic as this was, it shocked the nation. It shocked everybody. It couldn't believe that could possibly happen in the U.S. What actually shocked people more than the cold-blooded murders was the response of the family of those who were killed. That was what really shocked people more than anything, was the response of the family of those that were victims of this tragic murders. Because the world watched for months later as one by one, most of the family of those who were killed looked at Dylan Roof in the eyes and forgave him and showed love and mercy. And it's not like Dylan Roof was asking for it. He wasn't. He was proud of what he did. He still is proud of what he did. He thinks he did the right thing. He really did. And yet, the families of those who were killed stood up, looked at him in the face, and said, I forgive you. And I want you to receive the grace that I've received. Guys, the secular media didn't really know how to handle this. That's one of the things that really stuck out to me at the time, back in 2015. The media didn't know what to do with this. Reactions basically went from either confusion or anger, or both, a little bit of both. That's kind of what happened. The angry reaction was often people feeling like this is ridiculous. This, like, people always expect black people to have to just take it. Have to just take all these horrible atrocities. We shouldn't be forgiving. We shouldn't be accepting of this. We should be angry. That was one reaction. And then the other reaction in the media was like, wow, that was unexpected. I'm confused. I don't really know what to do with this. Like, they're forgiving these people. Why? That was the other reaction that often happened in the media. There was confusion that anyone would forgive a man doing something so horrible, especially a man who never asked for their forgiveness. And I don't blame the media, guys. I don't think the media is the worst thing in the world. I don't blame them for how they felt about things. Because if you don't have the gospel, then you don't understand what the families did. You just won't understand it. You can't possibly understand what it took for the family to do that unless you have the understanding of the gospel. Without the revelation from Jesus here in this parable, you couldn't possibly understand that they knew the weight of grace, that they understood the weight of grace, and that their grace that God gave them was put to a test that I hope none of us ever have to be put to. But they got it, and they understood it. I'm just going to read you one quote of the man who was the son of the reverend that died. He said this, and he said this to Dylan Roof. He said, I know that you don't understand, but God requires me to forgive you, and I forgive you. He also requires me to plead and pray for you, and I do that. The media, the world, that doesn't make sense, because that's not how our world works. But that is how the kingdom works. That kind of insane, radical grace and mercy is how the kingdom works. They knew the debt that God forgave, and they extended that grace and that mercy even to the most horrible debtor imaginable in our world. Because there is no debt that reaches that which God forgave us. There's just nothing that comes close. We always live under the weight of it, forever. But it's a good and a freeing weight. I know that idea of weight feels bad to you. Like, I don't want to live under any weight. I just want to be free. Well, unfortunately, your two options in life are live under the 5 trillion or live under grace. Those are the two options you have in this world. You can't take both of them off. You live under one or the other. And the weight of grace sounds like kind of oppressive. Like, I don't want to live under a weight. I want to live under the weight of grace. But have you ever wondered why Jesus expects us not to be angry? How does he expect that from his people? Because people who live under the weight of grace have a freedom from anger and from vengeance and from hatred in a way that this world will never understand. Because this world doesn't work the way God's kingdom works. John 18:36, Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world." And that's a truth that we can live under with Christ. We're going to do some worship right now, guys. Let's stand up. We're gonna sing. And as we do this, I just want to encourage you guys to think about the weight of this grace. Think about how this parable is not meant for us to just say, "Oh, well, we should be a forgiving person." No, it's way more radical than that. We should be people who are transformed by the weight of grace. And that's what we're called to be. So let's think about that as we get ready to worship the King. All right, guys, we're just going to do 2 songs right now, and as we do this, one of them is a new one. We haven't done it before, and it's a song about the consistency of God being with us, this is God extending His grace to us as people. And as we come before Him and as we worship Him, this is what we can do. We can praise Him for being a God who is with us in the highs and the low points of our life. There's a consistency in God being with us. And that's the kind of consistency we're called to have. That's the kind of grace we're called to have. We don't just extend grace when we're in a good place. And then we're off the hook when we're in a bad place. We're called to extend our grace to the Lord and our grace to other people in all the highs and lows of our life. So let's come before Him. Is the guitar on right now? Not like hearing it. Maybe. Yes. Oh, it's not plugged in. That'd be one.
Okay, is it on?
Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? I'm like yelling at Kristen, like, "Come on, get it right." Hi, guys. This song is new, and it's a little different. It's a little eclectic. So we have lyrics, we have slides. Think about the words as we're singing them, because it's very poetic. It's very powerful as we come before Him. So let's sing to Him right now, and yeah, let's worship Him for who He is. When it feels like the dark, when it feels like the dark lingers longer than the night, when the shadows feel like rain, are you chasing me down? Tell me, where could I run from your light? Where could I hide? And within your precious thoughts, there's no hiding from your love. Highs and lows, Lord, you're greater than all I know. Should I rise or should I fall? Even so, Lord, your mercy is all I know. You're too good to let me go. Should I dance in the heights or make my bed among the dead? Your mercy waits for every step. planned it from the start. Should the dawn come with wings, find me far side of the sea, there your hand still fastens me, ever closer to your heart. And highs and lows, Lord, you're with me every way it goes. Should I rise or should I fall? And even so, Lord, your mercy is an even flow. Should I rise or should I fall? Though you're faithful to it all, you're too good to let me go. All right, now, guys, I just ask you to close your eyes right now. And as we think of this parable, think about the weight of the grace that has been given to you. Let's just come before the Lord, knowing that in the highs and the lows, He is with us. Just give to us, consider the grace that you've been forgiven. It's been extended to you. Let's come before Him in grace and mercy. Highs and lows surround me either way it goes. Highs and lows, you surround me either way it goes. Should I rise or should I fall? Lord, you're with me through it all. Highs and lows, in the rhythms of your grace I go. Should I rise or should I fall? You are faithful through it all. You're too good to let me go. Heavenly Father, Lord, you are good to us. Lord, you are great and merciful. Lord, right now we just consider the weight of that grace. Lord, we consider our position as servants who received it. We just sing that you are good. Lord, we take ourselves out of the equation right now. We just praise you for who you are. You give a light. You are love. You bring light to the darkness. You give hope. You restore every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only, God. You give light, you are love, you bring light to the darkness. You give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Sing all the earth, so we shout his praise someday. We'll start that chant. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for that grace, Lord, for that mercy that came when we didn't deserve it. Lord, but we needed it so bad, Father. We just pray against a feeling of cheapness with your grace, Lord, a feeling of cheapness with your mercy, Lord. Your grace and your mercy did not come cheap, Lord. It came with a cost, and you bore it because you love us. And now we get to have that grace and a mercy become part of our lives. Lord, we were transformed to be graceful and merciful people. God, let us become that. Lord, let us extend that to everyone around us so that we truly become people that reflect the grace that you've extended to us. Lord, I pray this in your name. Amen. All right, guys, let's head to life groups.
Make sure to stop the lighting.
Yeah, I was just gonna say. Bye, guys.